Number 3, we are in the bunker again. We're in number 3. This video is kind of like the start of fighting in World War II. It's also going to deal with the Atlantic side, or I should say the European side of the fight, because there's two sides of the fight. We're going to be talking about the European side, which is like us versus Germany and Italy a little bit, and then it's also going to be the Pacific side, which is going to be us versus Japan. And those are two different type of arenas that we're going to be doing this battle in of our lives. And we're going to spend a day mostly on the European front. So we're going to talk about how the war started, the major players that got the war started, and then we'll get into the crux of everything else. So the big thing on the European side, we're going to talk about Hitler's actions. I'm gonna read through them real quickly, and I'm going to describe them each one of them at a time. So here are the dominoes, the steps that Hitler took to take over Europe. And each one of these steps, you look at it like if they would have did something here, it would have stopped this from happening, which it's kind of like World War I with those dominoes. It's just like that with World War II. So here's a list, and I'm going to talk about them each one at a time. So Hitler takes over the Rhineland. That's 1. 2, he annexes Austria. 3, he goes into the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, and then he marches his troops into Czechoslovakia. Hitler then and Stalin basically split Poland in half. They do a handshake agreement, like let's rip it in half. He takes over Denmark, Norway, breaks through the marginal line in France. Belgium and the Netherlands are taken over. He does air raids against Great Britain, and then he attacks the Soviet Union, which is going to ultimately lead to his downfall in a few years. So let's break these down one at a time. So the first one is the Rhineland. The Rhineland is almost the border between Germany and France, and it was taken away from them during the Treaty of Versailles. So Hitler goes in and he takes out the Rhineland, or he conquers the Rhineland, brings it back to Germany, and everybody in Europe was like, okay, don't do that again, bad boy. And Hitler's like, yeah, I won't do that again. And then he goes and he annexes Austria, which is basically bringing Austria into the German fold. And then people in Europe were like, don't, bad Hitler, bad Hitler. And then he goes, yeah, I won't do any more. And then he goes and he takes what's called the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. And the reason why this is important is because there's a whole lot of coal, there's iron, there's stuff that you can use to build the military. So this weird sea or snake around Czechoslovakia that borders Germany, he invades that land so that he can get that coal and iron to start building his military up. And again, Europe is like, Hitler, you're just a little rascal. And I'm being a little lib about this, but the reality is they just didn't stand up to these little things. It's legitimately a equivalency that you can look at with the whole Ukraine thing. You can sit here and you can go, well, it's none of our business. Well, that's kind of what Europe did with Germany when he was doing all these little takeovers, because it's not their land. You shouldn't do that, Germany. And you could say, Russia, you shouldn't do that. But at what point do you give a mouse a cookie and you stop giving them the glass of milk? That's what's going on with Germany right now in World War II. Is you have Hitler who's asked, for a cookie. He gets a cookie, he asks for a glass of milk, then he wants a napkin, and then he wants all the other things. And by the time you get to the end of the book, that mouse got a whole lot of things, and no one ever stopped him. And in Germany's case, they keep taking, and nobody's stopping them until it's too late. Anyway, so he takes over the Sudetenland. Then he marches into Czechoslovakia, and with zero resistance takes over Czechoslovakia. And you'll see this on my map when we go into class. He just keeps taking more and more pieces of Europe as he goes, conquering as he goes. Then he looks for Poland. Now, Poland was really created to be a buffer zone between Germany and Russia after World War I. It's a country that's right between them, and Hitler doesn't like Stalin. Stalin does not like Hitler. But they do this handshake agreement like, dude, here's the deal. Why don't we team up, put our guns down against each other, and put our guns up against Poland, and we'll just split that country in half. Like it's a wishbone on Thanksgiving Day. And they do. They rip Poland in half, and the Polish people are decimated by this. This is going to be really one of the worst places to be during World War II. Because you have Russia on one side, you have Germany on the other side, and the Eastern Front is pretty much Poland is where most people die, and it's just bad news bears. Then uh, he, I got to explain a little bit of military tactics in order to understand how Germany's doing all this. One thing he does is something called the Blitzkrieg. The Blitzkrieg is a method of shock and awe. So what Germany would do is they'd come in with their Luftwaffe, which is their air force, and they'd bomb the crap out of someplace. And then after they bomb the crap out of it, they send their tanks in to basically mow over any major resistance, to shock and awe. And then they would do infantry. So Blitzkrieg is boom, boom, boom. It's air, land, and men. It's planes, tanks, infantry. If you remember planes, tanks, infantry, you're good to go. And he also uses this thing called the pincer movement, where you go into a line, you break through their line, and then you encircle them and destroy them. And these two type of tactics, along with their Luftwaffe, which is one of the at the beginning of the war, the best air force around at the beginning of the war. Once we get involved, and not just like boasting like uh, the American side, but it's just true. The RAF, which was the English side, was pretty good air force. But Luftwaffe was the crown jewel of Germany. And when we get involved with our air force, it's kind of it's not as fair. Especially plus they've been fighting war for a few years before we get involved. So anyway, that's why they're taking over all these places. So after they take over Poland, Hitler goes, you know what? Denmark and Norway sound like a good place to take over. So they take over Denmark and Norway. And at this point, Churchill gets elected to parliament. And the reason why becomes a problem for Hitler is because Churchill does not like Hitler. And he's saying, this is bad. We got to do something. Now, there's a guy named Chamberlain who's actually the prime minister of England who does diddly squat. He does a thing called appeasement. Basically, like, he's the one that's giving the mouse a cookie and the mouse is asking for a glass of milk. And Churchill's like, stop giving in to this man. Like, he's just going to keep taking, taking, and taking. Well, Churchill was right because what happens is using the Blitzkrieg method, the same way they take over France in World War I, almost identical, the same way they take over one, is they take over France again. Germany takes over France again in World War II. They go through Belgium. They go almost around the majority of France's defenses, and they take over France pretty darn quickly. They split France into an occupied zone and a free zone, where you still have French resistance, but Paris is in the occupied zone. They set up the Vichy government, which is basically a Nazi-ran government in France, and France needs to get saved again. I always do this to poor France, but it's real. Like they need to get helped out again, which we do because we're buddies. Remember, without them, we wouldn't be here. Revolutionary War, they gave us most of our guns, so I can make fun of them now. But the reality is, I'm only able to do that with a non-English accent because of their help. But anyway, we got to help them out. And at this point, with Belgium and the Netherlands after that being taken over, you got this. Okay, we need to actually do something about this. And by the time the UK decides that we need to do something about this, they start getting bombed by Hitler with their Luftwaffe. Luftwaffe is the air force for Germany. And these air raids are just terrible. You're talking most populated places on the planet are in like London at the time. And there a lot of places are obliterated. Many people died. Homes were destroyed. People spent most of the war in the subway tunnels. A lot of the people, because it was the safest place to be, which is actually an interesting little story about mosquitoes. If we have time in class, I'll teach you about. But anyway, after he starts bombing England, he thinks, well, I can't be touched. And he does something that was just really stupid. In retrospect, of course, he goes, you know that buddy of mine, Stalin, who I just took over Poland with, I'm going to attack him. And this is all easy to do now because it's retrospect, right? It's I can see this now and be like, yeah, that was the part where Hitler really messed up, but it's Monday morning quarterback, right? But him attacking Stalin when he did was the setting of the stage of his loss in World War II. You can argue it wasn't until we got involved, but really that takes up the majority of his military force is fighting Stalin during the entirety of World War II while he's in it. And that's where the majority of people of his soldiers are going to die. It's going to create eventually that two-sided war later on after D-Day. This was what I call hubris. Hubris, if you know a story where Icarus flies too close to the sun, it's because he thought he could. He thought he was better than what his father was telling him, Daedalus, and he flew too close to something because of hubris, and then his wings melted and he fell to the sea and died. Hitler thinking he was better than the other generals who said we shouldn't do this was the cost of his end, because when you go against Stalin, especially when eventually he goes and tries to take Stalingrad during wintertime, you're just going to lose. And he does this 4 days after Pearl Harbor. I'm sorry, 4 days after the Pearl Harbor attack, Hitler declares war on the United States. So now he has not only the Stalin issue to deal with, he now has declared war on us. And you put yourself in a situation that your hubris took over, and you're going to lose. Which, thankfully, he lost, because the dude did some horrible things. We'll talk about those horrible things later. So that is kind of like the setup of how the war starts. The next video is going to go into we're going to talk about the actual fighting in Europe, and then the end of the war in Europe, and then the video after that we're going into the Pacific. So we're getting it done, folks. So peace out.